Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, School Safety Begins with Prevention. This is the first webinar in our Preventing and Addressing Gun Violence in Schools mini-series, and we're happy to have you with us here today. On behalf of the United States Department of Education, we're pleased to welcome you to the event. And in fact, we have over 900 people registered for this event from every state, including Washington, D.C., 4 U.S. territories, and 6 additional countries who are interested in hearing information about this important topic. This webinar and the mini-series are part of our Lessons from the Field webinar series, which highlights effective tools, techniques, and strategies that are employed by you, everyday practitioners, working in schools and addressing the hot topics that are on the top of your minds. You can access the recorded webinars from this series on the web page that is being shared with you in the chat at this moment. As always, as you participate, if you have additional strategies that are working in your community, please be sure to let us know. You can share these strategies with us at Nestle or at the Best Practices Clearinghouse at ed.gov. Together, we know that our work is always improved as we share strategies across schools and districts, and we appreciate hearing about the new approaches that folks are using. Please note that the contents of this presentation and this webinar do not necessarily represent the policy or views of the United States Department of Education, nor does any of the information in this webinar imply endorsement by the United States Department of Education. My name is Cindy Caraway Wilson. I'm a training specialist with the National Center on Safe Supportive Learning Environments, or Nestle. I will be the moderator for today's event. Nestle is funded by the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools within the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. And to learn a little bit more about Nestle, we invite you to visit our website. This particular slide shows you a picture on the right-hand side of our homepage, and on the left, some interesting resources that are popularly looked at and downloaded. We encourage you to also follow us on social media, where we share the latest resources and events coming out of the field. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. All materials that you see today, including the slides, the referenced resources, and the recorded version of this webinar, will be available on the event page within this website. And in fact, the speaker bios and the slides are already posted. Please feel free to follow the link in chat to download the slides and follow along. Please also note, as I said earlier, that all of the recordings of the Lessons from the Field series, including this mini-series, are accessible on the webpage. We are pleased to be partnering in this webinar series with the REMS TA Center. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Safe and Supportive Schools administers the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, or the REMS TA Center. This center helps to build preparedness capacity, including prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts of schools, districts, and institutions of higher education with their community partners at the state, local, and federal levels. The REMS Center offers free technical assistance, asynchronous and synchronous trainings, publications and guidance documents, topic-specific resources, and interactive tools that are all designed to support schools, school districts, and institutions of higher education in their efforts to collaborate with community partners as they work to develop and maintain high-quality emergency operations plans. We encourage you to visit their website at rems.ed.gov and follow them on social media at REMS TA Center to get up-to-date information on resources, training, and tools as they develop and release to the field. For this webinar, we're following our regular agenda process. And right now we're in our logistics and introduction. We will move into the welcome. And then after that, we will have a few people who are going to be presenting context-setting presentations to give us a great foundation for the conversation that takes place in our panel discussion, where practitioners will share how they're doing these prevention efforts on the ground. We will close out content delivery of the webinar and then move directly into our moderated live Q&A, So do please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A feature throughout the webinar, and we will work to get to answer as many of those questions as possible. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Danny Carlson, Chief of Staff in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the United States Department of Education. Danny?
Hey, thanks, Cindy. On behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, I'm pleased to welcome you to our latest Lessons from the Field webinar. School safety begins with prevention, which is the first in our Preventing and Addressing Gun Violence in Schools series. Keeping students safe from incidents of violence, including gun violence in their schools communities, is a top priority. Since the mass shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado in 1999, there have been an estimated 394 school shootings, exposing more than 360,000 students to gun violence. Although we cannot prevent every act of violence, we do know how to create learning environments better focused on teaching students expectations for success and supporting student and staff needs to help mitigate or prevent the impact of incidents of school violence. The department is offering this webinar series focused on evidence-based and promising practices to prevent, prepare, respond, and recover from incidents of school violence. The mini-series will focus on promoting school safety and what we need to do to ensure that all schools are safe, positive, supportive learning environments where students feel a sense of belonging and receive the support they need to fully engage in school every step of the way. To that end, the mini-series today will start by exploring how schools can build foundations and utilize systems to promote school safety and prevent or mitigate incidents of violence. On April 24th, the next in this series, we'll focus on implementing effective emergency operations plans, including embedding gun violence prevention into those emergency operations plans. Then, on May 8th, the third event of this series, that will focus on promising practices in responding to violent incidents. Finally, on May 22nd, the last event of this series, will focus on supporting students and staff in recovery after a violent incident. We hope you will join us for the entire series. So what specifically will we be talking about today? Today's webinar will begin with a set of brief context setting presentations that share data on firearm injury among youth and what we are learning from recent firearm injury research. Also, the importance of building a positive school climate to promote school safety and reduce unwanted behavior, including acts of violence. Critical considerations if using threat assessments, how emergency operation plans can address prevention, and what students and caregivers need to know about safely storing firearms if they have them. From there, and during most of the event, 3 practitioners will then engage in a discussion with Cindy, our moderator, on how they have implemented prevention strategies in their schools, districts, and states. As we proceed with today's webinar, we know you will hear valuable information and strategies that you will be able to use in your schools and in your districts. Thank you again for joining us today and for your efforts in creating safer environments in your schools and communities. Now, I'd like to send it back over to Cindy to introduce our context setting speakers.
Thank you so much, Danny, for the welcome and also for the ongoing support for this webinar series and particularly this mini series. We greatly appreciate that. This slide shows you the 3 context setting speakers that we will have providing us some brief information about those key elements that Danny just mentioned. You can view their bios at the link that is now being shared in chat. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Sumner, who's the Senior Advisor in the Division of Violence Prevention at the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Sumner?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you again for the opportunity to present to you today. I only have about 5 or 6 minutes, but in this brief presentation, I'll try to touch briefly on some key data, youth research findings, and prevention opportunities relevant to youth. First, at a national level, it's really important to acknowledge that both firearm suicide rates and firearm homicide rates are presently near multi-decade highs, and these general trends are consistent for youth as well. The U.S. saw substantial increases in deaths from firearm injuries during the pandemic, and unfortunately, existing disparities were exacerbated and widened. For example, the firearm homicide rate among Black individuals increased disproportionately, and the firearm suicide rate among American Indian and Alaska Native peoples increased disproportionately. A few years back, researchers published a prominent article in the New England Journal of Medicine demonstrating how firearm injury had become the leading cause of death among children and teens, overtaking motor vehicle crashes. This pattern has continued to hold for subsequent years now. The data that I've briefly touched on these previous slides has focused on mortality or death data. And although I don't have time to talk about it deeply, CDC collects a wide range of data on this topic, including risk factors that are more upstream and relevant to youth. One important source of information on this topic is the Youth Risk Factor Behavior Survey, or YRBS. For example, one data point that this survey collects among young people ages 14 to 17 is around non-recreational gun carrying. Recently, about 1 in 20 boys in the United States carried a firearm in the past year, not for purposes of recreation or hunting. And most concerningly, gun carrying was much more common among young people who had experienced violence in their life, were thinking about suicide, or were using substances. Some of the important data that we are learning about related to youth comes from new research in the field. In 2020, CDC began receiving annual funding to support firearm research projects at universities and medical schools across the country. And to date, we've been able to support 34 different research awards, and many of these have had a focus on youth. For example, researchers at UC Davis studied youth in 20 large cities across the country over about a 15-year period of time, and very closely examined how gun violence in young people's communities affected their mental health, but also studied what were protective factors for young people. Researchers at the University of Washington analyzed a very large and rigorous randomized controlled trial across 24 rural communities and 7 different states, looking at a model called Communities That Care. What they found is that towns implementing the program experienced a marked reduction in handgun carrying among middle and high school students in towns that implemented the program. Researchers at RTI collaborated with the Crisis Text Line to study the psychological impact of the mass shooting at Uvalde Elementary School by looking at the Crisis Text Line responses to young people nationwide who were affected by grief and other stressors after the event. And finally, researchers at Northwestern University highlighted in their research the disproportionate risk that some young people have by studying young people involved in the juvenile justice system over about a 16-year period. During this period of time, more than 1/4 of Black and Hispanic males enrolled in the study had been injured or killed by a firearm. To try and increase awareness about effective and evidence-based prevention strategies across a wide range of topics, including youth violence, CDC has multiple resources for action documents on its website that lists and describes effective prevention strategies that can be implemented. In fact, tomorrow we have an update to the previous youth violence resources for action, now titled the Community Violence Prevention Resource for Action, which will contain even more updated and expanded prevention content in this area. So I encourage you to look at that on CDC's website in the coming days. In closing, I'll note that if individuals have interest in learning more about data related to this topic, as well as the research that CDC funds and emerging findings from that research that is available on our website at the link above. Thank you again so much for having me.
Dr. Sumner, thank you so much for all of that data. It's very sobering data, but it's so important for us to know that these trends are happening. And I appreciate that you offered resources for us to use to try to address some of these trends and turn them around. So thank you again for sharing your information. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Greta Colombi, who's the director of the National Center on Safe Supportive Learning Environments, who's our next context-setting speaker. Greta?
Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. So here we go. Thank you. As Danny mentioned, the U.S. Department of Education is dedicated to ensuring that all schools are safe, positive learning environments where students feel a sense of belonging and receive the supports they need to fully engage in their school. Our focus in today's webinar, as Cindy had mentioned and Danny talked about, and Dr. Sumner as well, is really on prevention. The key factors in preventing behaviors that interfere with learning include actively engaging students in the learning, clearly articulating and teaching school-wide behavioral expectations, and identifying students early who may need additional supports to experience school success. So let's dig into this a little bit more. Namely, we know that schools can provide supports and develop and utilize systems to both promote safety and prevent and mitigate the effects of violent incidents. That is simply when we build a positive school climate while also developing a high-quality emergency operations plan, we can build strong relationships with students, staff, and families in a way that allows them to feel like they belong. And then, in turn, that makes it much easier for all to be responsive and respectful. You have heard school climate mentioned a few times already in the title of this segment, for example. So as I continue talking about it, let's first ensure we're on the same page. So what exactly is school climate? In short, school climate describes the school conditions that influence student learning. But what does that really mean? So over time, experts have explored how to define school climate, and one of the most common models used to define it today, per preeminent national experts, is the U.S. Department of Education's Safe Supportive Schools model. The model is framed by 3 domains, or pillars, as Nestle calls them: engagement, safety, and environment. And underneath each of those domains or pillars, there are a number of topics that fall within that. So for example, just to give you a sense, flavor of that, engagement is multifaceted and characterized by behavioral, emotional, and cognitive engagement via relationships, school participation, and cultural and linguistic competence. Safety is defined as schools and school-related activities where students are safe from violence, bullying, and harassment, the influence of substance misuse, emergency situations that may be weather, health, or violence related. And then environment is broadly characterized by its facilities, classroom practices, school-based health supports, and disciplinary policies and practices. It really sets the stage for the external factors that affect students. So in short, school climate really ultimately speaks to how students learn best when they're in environments in which they feel safe, supported, challenged, and accepted. So why is it important? Well, the way students, families, teachers, and other school staff experience the school climate affects student attendance, learning, and achievement. We know that students who learn in positive learning environments that are safe, supportive, and engaging are more likely to improve academically, participate more fully in the classroom, and develop skills that will help them be successful in school and life. And students who experience positive school climates are also less likely to participate in disruptive behavior, have issues with attendance like absenteeism and truancy, drop out, be suspended, display aggressive behavior, and engage in violence. It's also important to note that the ways in which teachers experience the climate of the school is also related to their levels of stress and burnout. And teacher turnover is lower and teacher satisfaction is higher in schools with positive school climates. As I just mentioned a moment ago, safety is a key component of school climate. And looking at the safety and school climate research, one can see a very clear relationship between the two, despite some tautological challenges. But simply put, when thinking about the connection between school safety and school climate, it can be useful to think of school climate as a three-legged stool. On one hand, the school can't have a positive school climate without safety. On the other, one can't just focus on school safety and expect to have a positive school climate. So how can schools build a positive school climate that promotes safety? Well, given its breadth, building and improving school climate involves systematically understanding how students, staff, and families perceive the school climate. This is typically allowed via administering school climate surveys and facilitating follow-up focus groups and interviews. It also involves engaging students, staff, and families in the improvement process, from planning to implementation to monitoring and evaluation. After all, the whole school community works within that school climate. And from there, you can make policy and systems changes. Those often are happening at the district level, and implementing school-wide practices and strategies. And last but not least, implementing classroom practices. So as we think about promoting school safety, some concrete strategies school climate might include establishing routines, co-creating behavioral expectations in and out of the classroom, and taking a matrix approach to prevent unwanted and interfering behaviors. So later in today's event, you will be hearing many more specifics on that, especially with our panel discussion. So determine what additional practices, tools, and supports are needed to both maintain a positive school climate and determine additional supports that are needed for supporting and responding to student needs. It really relies on a systematic approach, or organizing the events into 3 tiers, and probably many of you are familiar with this. So at tier 1, that's really what we're talking about in terms of universal interventions for all students that are really proactive and preventative in nature. Then there's tier 2. These are the targeted interventions for group of students who are exposed or at risk. And then tier 3, individualized interventions for a few students. But what we've learned is that the more we do to build tier 1 and to really make it as robust as possible, that the less is needed for tiers 2 and 3. So just that super importance of that tier 1. So for details on building and improving school climate, please do check out Nestle's School Climate Improvement Resource Package, which includes over 30 resources that meet a range of needs for constituents and educators interested in building and improving school climate. Resources come in the form of online modules, worksheets, self-assessments, action guides, and a reference manual. So I've talked about a lot of things about school climate. It sounds like a lot, but is it actually doable? And what I would say is that although it most certainly does take time, it is important to know that you are probably already doing something to improve your school climate, and you are not starting from ground zero. In fact, many districts and schools are in the process of implementing a variety of initiatives to support the social, emotional, and behavioral well-being of students. And some may question, is one thing really needed, especially now? We know there's just so much going on. But based on the research and what we see on the ground, school climate is foundational to these initiatives. Making school climate improvements is actually a critical part of the system that supports these other initiatives, whichever you may be implementing, or other common frameworks and approaches. And given the current challenges we see, it is really critical to improve these school climate foundations now to support overall success. So as I've been mentioning, focusing on establishing a safe, positive school climate sets that foundation for more easily determining additional practices, tools, and supports needed to both maintain this learning environment and determine additional supports needed for supporting and responding to student needs. We are aware that some schools have turned to conducting threat assessments as a means to prevent or mitigate incidents of school violence. Threat assessment is an approach to violence prevention designed to distinguish serious threats to others from cases in which the potential threat is not serious. As designed, a threat assessment process is intended to be part of maintaining school safety by proactively intervening in student conflicts and addressing student support needs early before they escalate into school violence incident or crisis requiring intervention by law enforcement or medical personnel. However, we also know that, unfortunately, implementation of threat assessment has been implemented unevenly across schools, districts, and states. And while it is being used, threat assessment is often not being used uniformly or consistent with effective and best practices. And we have little data to understand the negative impact or effectiveness of threat assessment. But what we do know from reports across different cities and school districts is that the use of threat assessments has disproportionately impacted students of color and students with disabilities. Sometimes, due to the use of threat assessments, students are removed from school without any additional supports or services and are left waiting for days, weeks, or months sometimes to be allowed back into school. And the behaviors that led to the threat assessment are never addressed or needed, or those needed supports are not provided. So because of these reports of how threat assessment is being used inconsistently and unfairly across the country, I want to share a few considerations for schools that are using or are considering using a threat assessment process. So first and foremost, threat assessment must comply with the federal civil rights laws and protections. A threat assessment alone is not sufficient prevention. Prevention efforts must start from creating that safe, supportive, and positive learning environment that I had been talking about. Threat assessment teams should be comprised of well-trained educators and other professionals that represent a diverse expertise across education, child development, mental health, behavioral health, safety, security, and the team is responsible for ensuring the procedure is equitably applied. If implementing threat assessment procedures, schools should evaluate their threat assessment process on a regular basis. Look at data and identify any concerning patterns that might suggest certain groups of students are being more frequently identified or impacted by this process. Schools should be prepared to make changes and adapt their system as appropriate when these trends are noted. And lastly, the system must be equipped to connect students with services. Students whose behaviors are not determined to pose a credible threat, schools should be equipped with strong multi-tier systems of support, that triangle I was just talking about a moment ago, be ready to support student needs in the school building. And if a student's behavior is considered to pose a threat to others, the school and community should be ready and able to connect the student and their family with appropriate behavioral health supports or other services that might be necessary. So with that, I thank you so much for having this opportunity to be able to speak, and feel free to reach out anytime if you would like to connect or get information or support.
Greta, thank you so much for that presentation. We can't emphasize how important it is for these safe, supportive climates to be in place before we do any other kind of prevention work to be as effective as we can possibly be. I also appreciate both the idea of the threat assessment and the cautions around the threat assessment so that we can be equitable and inclusive. And I know that several of our panelists are going to be addressing that very thing in our panel discussion. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Janelle Hughes, who is the Director of the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, or the REMS TA Center. Janelle?
Thank you so much, Cindy. The REMS TA Center is so grateful to partner with Nestle for this important webinar focused on preventing and addressing gun violence in the school setting, and also highlighting the importance of creating high-quality emergency operations plans as a part of those prevention efforts. I want to thank Mr. Carlson and Dr. Sumner for sharing important statistics around gun violence in our country. So the question is, what can schools and school partners do to help prevent and address gun violence in the school setting, and respond also to community-based gun violence incidents? And safe firearm storage is just one of many preventative actions that we can all take in keeping our school community and our school buildings and grounds safe. When firearms are stored safely, it can prevent them from getting into the hands of children and teens who may use them to intentionally or unintentionally harm themselves or others. So safe firearm storage truly goes a long way in preventing lives from being lost or permanently altered. So let's take a look at what some of the research tells us about this issue of safe firearm storage and how it impacts the school setting. Research shows that more than 4 million children live in a household with at least one unlocked or loaded firearm. Studies have also found that households with both locked firearms and locked ammunition have significantly lower risks of self-inflicted harm and injuries, and even lower risks of unintentional firearm injuries among children and teens in comparison to households that did not safely store firearms. And Dr. Sumner shared some stats from the YRBS on non-recreational gun carrying and intervention efforts. Let's also consider as a part of that conversation stats that show that approximately 3/4 of perpetrators in school-based active shooter situations acquired their firearm from the home of a parent or a close relative. Studies have found that, again, households with both locked firearms and ammunition have significantly lower risks. So it's important to emphasize the role of not only the school, but the whole school community, including parents and families, as a part of these prevention efforts. Dr. Sumner also shared some stats on schools shootings that have taken place since the Columbine shooting and how they compare to other leading causes of death. And we also want to note that since 2018, there have been more than 100 active shooter incidents per year in our country. And those numbers, of course, unfortunately, are steadily increasing. So what can we do about that? What action steps can school safety staff and partners use to help keep our community safe from gun violence? This threat, gratefully, to the safety of our schools can be prevented. And so that's really what we want to emphasize as a part of today's conversation. It's important to really encourage the whole school community to use these steps to help prevent and minimize the risk of firearm-related deaths and injuries. Starting with safely storing firearms, storing them always unloaded in a tamper-proof locked cabinet box, firearm vault, storage case, whatever is preferred, that children or other unauthorized adults cannot access. As we highlighted earlier with stats related to both safely storing firearms and securing ammunition, it's important to store ammunition in a tamper-proof and locked cabinet or safer vault, again, that children or other unauthorized adults cannot access. It's also important to not only safely store ammunition and firearm, but also to secure firearms themselves. You can use trigger locks or cable locks to prevent a firearm from firing. Trigger locks use a mechanism that clamps down around the trigger housing to prevent it from being pressed, and cable locks are really threaded through the barrel or the action of a firearm to prevent it from firing. So again, there are various options that you can recommend to the whole school community as we work together to keep our communities safe. And there are additional actions that schools and school districts can take in collaboration with superintendents, school boards, and other community partners. You can share information about safe firearm storage with parents and families in your school communities. The REMS TA Center developed a letter as a resource for parents, families, guardians, and caregivers, as well as teachers and school staff to help build awareness around safe firearm storage, including highlighting what people can do to safely store firearms in their homes and in other spaces that children may occupy. We created the letter so that it is customizable to better meet the needs of your school community. So you can add resources specific to your state or local laws around child access, prevention, etc. We also encourage schools to partner with municipal and community leaders to help improve understanding of safe firearm storage, and also to share information around broader gun violence prevention efforts that may be taking place within the local community or at the state level. It's also important to engage other youth-serving organizations and partners, such as parent-teacher organizations and associations, out-of-school time program leaders, nonprofit agencies and entities, and other youth-serving entities who routinely interact with children, teens, families, guardians, and caregivers, again, reinforcing the importance of safe firearm storage. And we also really encourage integration of information about safe firearm storage into recurring communications with families and guardians about overall school emergency preparedness and school safety efforts. We want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the importance of also integrating gun violence prevention into efforts to create and maintain high quality school emergency operations plans. So Greta talked about that three-legged stool, and the school EOP really serves as one of the key anchors of that stool. It describes how people, not just students, but also teachers, administrators, staff, and visitors, as well as property, will be protected on and off campus. It also details who is responsible for carrying out specific actions before, during, and after an emergency. It will identify all the personnel, equipment, facilities, supplies, and other resources available, and of course, outline those courses of action that will be coordinated in the event of an emergency. And while school EOPs may vary in their contents, as Greta described, they really do need to be customized to that building level. But we generally recommend that they contain 3 sections: the basic plan, which provides an overview of the school's approach to emergency operations, such as training, exercises, and information collection. Also functional annexes, which are really going to present how the school will manage some of those common essential functions, such as evacuation, family reunification, communication and warning, etc., all that will take place before, during, and after an emergency. And then there is the threat and hazard specific annexes section, which is going to really identify those protocols that schools and their response partners will follow to address specific types of emergencies, including hurricanes, wildfires, power outages, and also gun violence, which of course is a part of our focus today. A gun violence annex, again, is going to be one element of your overall EOP and one of the many threat and hazard specific annexes that a school EOP will contain. It should outline those goals, courses of action, and objectives for all parties involved. It's important for it to also reference other functional annexes that will need to be activated in the event of an emergency. And you can see on the screen here just some of those different types of annexes or emergency management functions that will need to be activated in the event of an emergency. The REMS-TA Center is currently developing a sample gun violence annex for the field. If you haven't already, we encourage you to join our mailing list so that you can receive access to that annex once it's complete. But in the meantime, you can access other sample annexes via the publications and guidance document section of our site. We currently have sample annexes on shelter in place, evacuation, lockdown, and family reunification. So again, I want to thank you so much for inviting the REMS-TA Center to join today's webinar. We are also a resource. We are only one email or phone call away. You can reach out to us at any time for technical assistance requests on any aspect of emergency management planning and on developing and maintaining high quality school EOPs. And don't forget, you can also follow us on social media for continuous updates on resources, tools, and trainings that we develop for the field, and also some resources that we feature from some of our federal partners in the field. Thank you again.
Janelle, thank you so much for all of that information about gun safety storage and some strategies on how to educate young people and their families, as well as the EOP information. We greatly appreciate that. And by way of reminder to all of you in the audience, all of the resources that are available at the REMS-TA Center have been posted via the chat with the link for you to attend to the website. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome in our three panelists. We have Dr. Steve Goodman, who is a partner in the Center in Positive Behavior Interventions and Support and a co-investigator in Integrated Multi-Tier Systems of Support Research Network, which is through the University of Connecticut, and he is in Michigan. Kiana Longnecker, who's a school climate and culture consultant from Muskegon Area Intermediate School District in Michigan also. And then Denise Patrazak, who is a student wellness coordinator and lead system navigator at the Student Wellness Department at the Educational Service Center in Northeast Ohio. So thank you all for being here today. We greatly appreciate your expertise and you being willing to share what you're doing in your schools related to improving safety for all students. So I'd like to begin with a question that goes out to all three of you. We'd like to hear a little bit from each of you on why, your perspective on why the safe and supportive school environment or climate is so important in preventing and responding to school behaviors that are unwanted or that might interfere with learning and escalate to violence or crisis. Steve, I'd like to begin with you on this one.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. So school climate can really be a positive influence on the quality of learning environment, or it can be a significant barrier when the climate is not so supportive. So when we look at a positive climate, it really promotes school as enjoyable, encouraging, affirming, which helps with the prevention. So we know that there are good things that happen, improves better attendance, academic outcomes, safety, less aggression, but reverse, just the flip side of that, a more negative school climate can be linked to depression or low self-esteem or lower academic achievement or increased peer victimization. So there's a lot of good things that come from a good school climate.
Yeah, and that what's also, I think, nice about it is that we can impact that climate, right? And help to make some changes. Thank you so much. Denise, what would you like to add?
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'd like to add about school connectedness. It plays a crucial role in creating a safe and supporting environment, which in turn prevents school violence because students and staff feel a sense of belonging. Having at least one trusted adult, trusted caring adult, provides children with emotional stability, guidance, and a sense of security. All of these are really important. If we don't have them, we might see social isolation, stress, which are both risk factors.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. It's that importance of the relationship can't be overstated at all. In fact, there's a professor up in Canada who's done a lot of research on youth service work, who is famously quoted for saying the relationship is the intervention. Right? That without the relationships, interventions are less powerful. Thank you. And Kiana.
Thank you for having me as well. And I agree both with Steve and Diane. There's so much that comes from having that positive school climate. It's really the number one factor in preventing those behaviors. When students, and I think sometimes we forget to remember that when students, staff, and their families in the community all feel welcome and like they belong in the school community, we're much less likely to see those interfering behaviors. When people feel that community and they care about that, they are much less likely to want to damage those relationships and damage that portion of their lives. And so when we are able to build systems that make that and create and lead to those positive school climates, we're able to have that predictability and those, like you said, relationships that make our schools safer.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Kiana, we're going to stick with you for a moment. If you can, each of you, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you see overall school climate improvement working to help prevent or reduce the violence specifically. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Kiana?
Yeah, I would like to add that when you have a trusting school climate, you are able to prevent things, not just because people will be less likely to want to engage in behaviors such as that in their school, but it gives students and people the opportunity to report if they see or hear of any sort of threat of violence as well. In Michigan, we have a program called OK to Say, where anybody in the community, including students or families, are able to report anonymously any threats of violence, and having a community where a student or a family member is comfortable reporting that there may be something occurring really is a part of that school climate, and also can prevent any sort of violent actions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Denise, what would you like to add?
I'd like to add in, and I'd like to also share that in our state of Ohio, we also have anonymous reporting, and that's really important as far as that sharing that information to hopefully prevent something from happening, as well as giving a venue for that openness. We know that being proactive and catching things before, as early as possible can be a really important factor in reducing violence. And also, as far as implementation of prevention strategies, are really important with school climate, early identification, which that is the anonymous reporting, but also having students feel safe and supported and connected is really important as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. That ability to be able to see something, say something, and then have a way in which to do that, say something piece is really important. Steve, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the discussion earlier where it was about connections and the relationships. And because school climate, students are more likely to share the concerns with adults, as was mentioned, but adults are also more likely to be aware of their student well-being because of that connection and understanding. So when we look at that, positive school climates provide opportunities to proactively prevent problems from occurring by setting up good, effective environments, a culture of competency for our students and staff, but it also helps to identify and intervene early for potential concerns. And I would suggest that this is helpful for both supportive environments for students with internalizing as well as externalizing concerns.
Excellent. And that's a great point. The internalizing concerns are just as important, but they're also sometimes invisible because they are internally facing. Right. So I'd like to stay with you for a moment, Steve. You mentioned that culture of competency. And when you and I spoke, you combined that statement, that culture of competency, with the idea of using a matrix to structure school staff communications and expectations. Can you describe that a little bit for our audience?
Yes, thank you. So when we talk about a culture of competence, culture of competence really looks at a shared understanding of what expectations are, a shared understanding of experiences around those, and a shared acknowledgement of what we want and what we're looking for. So what we do is create a tool, have a tool that is used to create that culture. And the example that you see here is a behavior matrix, and we can look at social emotional behavior skills. Within that, too often, we make assumptions that students already know what they should be doing. And we know that students live in complex systems between the community, the home environment, the school. So we want to make sure students know what they should be doing, where they should be doing, how to act in certain ways. So we create this matrix. And what you see is on the left column, we identify behavior expectations, being respectful, we are safe, we are responsible. And then what we do is we overlay it on a matrix of different settings. So what's it look like in all settings within school? What's it look like hallways or classrooms or lunchrooms? And this is appropriate for preschool all the way up through high school. So it's not just an elementary setting. Based on this, I really want to emphasize that we don't just post rules, because telling is not the same as teaching or helping students understand what it is. So we identify these expectations. We actually teach them in settings where the student should be engaged in these behaviors. And we have the adults who are involved in monitoring students be part of that. Now, as part of that too, we're talking about students come in different complex situations where they're living. there may be confusion or misunderstanding between the school expectations and those in the community or home. So what we also do is set it up for personal matrix for students. And I think this provides respect for the students and understanding where they're coming from. So with the expectations, we say, what's it look like at school? What's it like to be safe at school? Now, what's it like to be safe in your home? And what's it like to be safe in your neighborhood? And sometimes those are aligned, and sometimes those may be a mismatch. So we want to acknowledge where the students are coming from, support that, and make sure that they understand what's it like in school. And again, this is for, we make it inclusive for all. So it's not just you are respectful or you are safe. We are as adults, we are as community members coming into the school, and certainly for the students. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I particularly like that personal matrix because context is everything. And sometimes when people have to behave very differently in the different contexts, there could be, overlap, or there could be spillover that happens where behavior is happening outside of context. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to stay with you for a little longer, Steve. And if you could tell us a little bit about how you see the implementation of the matrix in helping to prevent those unwanted or interfering behaviors, particularly around violence in schools.
Yes, so we implement this by, I think, a couple of things, just to make sure it's creating a positive, predictable environment, because it's very hard for our students who are sensitive to changes in what's going on from the pandemic to mental health concerns. So we want to create safe, predictable environments that allow all of our students to build a sense of trust and for physical and emotional safety. This decreases unpredictable responses and ambiguity, because we know that if I'm not sure what's happening, it could escalate my behavior, and it may make me feel uncomfortable or engage in unwanted behavior. So what we are seeing is that the higher the level of student need or the environment disruptions, the higher the need for predictable routines and greater opportunity for improvement of that climate and culture.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's really clear connectivity there. I appreciate that. I'd like to come over to you, Denise. So Denise, you're doing quite a bit of school climate work and prevention and other approaches that can help to reduce or mitigate these interfering behaviors, including acts of violence. One of the things that your colleague mentioned is the training and coaching supports that you offer your districts and schools around the comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines developed by Dewey Cornell out of the University of Virginia. Can you please talk to us a little bit about those assessments and why you chose to focus on those ones particularly?
Sure, Cindy. Thank you. In March 2021, Ohio became the first state to pass the Safety and Violence Education Students Act, which is termed SAVE Students. It's a groundbreaking bill calling for a whole child approach that focuses on comprehensive school safety and climate. School districts in our state are required to implement certain strategies to promote school safety. These include student instruction in specific health education topics related to suicide and violence prevention, social isolation, anonymous reporting systems, threat assessment teams, emergency management plans, and staff training. The SAFE Student Act contributed to advancing violence prevention efforts not only through our state, but in the work in our department and with our districts. I want to share how we are supporting districts and schools with their threat assessment training and coaching based on the direction from our governor and Department of Educational Workforce and their support of Dr. Dewey Cornell's comprehensive school threat assessment guidance model. Under the SAVE Act, districts can select several models, but through that direction from our governor and the Department of Education, the state rolled out the not only funding as well as technical assistance and training to increase the guidance and coaching and training around the CSTAG model. The CSTAG model offers a comprehensive evidence-based and multidisciplinary approach to identify and addressing potential threats of violence. Some of the key components and elements of the threat assessment include early intervention, multidisciplinary teams, structured assessment process, risk management, prevention, and education. All of these are reasons why we wanted to move forward with this important evidence-based model.
Wonderful. So it really does take that whole child approach, bringing it together in one model for you. It sounds like it was pretty effective.
Yes, and it meets not only the requirements through our legislation, but also the guidance of our state in regards to meeting the whole child with a multi-tiered system of support framework.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Kiana, I'd like to come over to you. You also are engaging in a lot of work, prevention work, to reduce the risk of these unwanted behaviors, which might lead to violent acts. I would love to hear about the work that you're doing. If you can describe some of the approaches that you're utilizing to prevent or mitigate these unwanted behaviors.
Thank you. In addition to, like Steve said, having those safe and predictable systems where students and staff, like anybody in the community, knows what to expect when things occur. The model that we use in many parts of Michigan is from the Secret Service, and it's the behavior threat assessment and management model. And some really important parts of that are, number one, creating a safe school climate, but also establishing that multidisciplinary team that is well trained in the entire process. And I think that it's especially important that we provide training for all stakeholders when we do come to a point where we are assessing the risk of violence. And all stakeholders is bigger than just your administrative staff and your mental health folks at school. Your students need to know what to expect. The community and the partners or the agencies that we partner with in our communities also really need to understand what this process is about. And so we've had the opportunity to partner with our local law enforcement, our school resource officers, to provide training and understanding so they know what to expect when a school is embarking upon one of these assessments, and how they can support and how they are a part of the team as well. We include local mental health agencies because there are times that they are engaged with the families or students involved. We also have been able to maintain a strong, sometimes the risk assessment is one of the ways to build the strongest relationship with the family as well, because we know that the family is really, really where the change is going to happen. So the whole point of a risk assessment is nothing to do with discipline or finding who's done what wrong, but it's really to find what supports are needed for the student and the family, and having those relationships with multiple people in the school community and the community at large really help us build those management plans. We often discover in the threat assessment that the family or student needs more support, and it isn't just something, not a behavioral issue, but it is a need for support in a different way. So while it is a threat assessment, which feels like a reactive or responsive thing, it really does become a huge part of that prevention. And being able to partner with so many of those people in our community, we are much more likely to provide the supports that do prevent those violent behaviors.
Excellent, thanks. And the approach that you and Denise's group are taking are pretty similar in that you have these multidisciplinary teams, and these assessments are just a piece. And there's a whole bunch of services and supports that wrap around the young person and the family, which makes it much more of a prevention, but also tier 2, tier 3 as needed. Excellent, thank you. I'd like to just spend about a minute or so, if that's possible, on our next question around implementation. So just a little bit from each of you. Steve, can you tell us about some initial steps that schools and school teams might need to take as they consider developing and implementing a school matrix?
Yes, absolutely. So I want to make sure that people understand that the matrix itself is not the endpoint. The endpoint is really looking at how we make sure everyone knows what to do, and that we are supporting each other and supporting, the culture of positive, climate here. So what we need to do is to get into that process. We have to have people involved. We want to make sure it reflects the values of the community. We have students involved in creating the matrix. But throughout all this, the important part is taking that matrix and turning it into teaching opportunities around what is the rationale why we're doing it, provide examples and non-examples of what it looks like and what it doesn't look like, provide opportunities for students to practice, and then provide feedback for the expected behaviors.
Excellent. So really taking it and making it into a living document that teaches skills for both staff and students.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Denise, can you describe some of the steps that the schools and districts in your area have taken to ensure that teachers are well trained at implementing these efforts well?
Sure. So I think it's really important as far as looking at what's the needs in your district and then aligning that with current initiative that you're already maybe have implemented, and making sure that as far as like a multidisciplinary team, if you already have existing teams that maybe you can combine and move the work forward with, and making sure again that aligning so that we don't have the multiple team members and teams working on some similar initiatives. Training is a big component of this threat assessment, but also it's taking it back to your district and aligning with your policies and your procedures, making sure that you have a process in that align with what is needed again in your district, and how do you support students and staff in regards to the safety. Kiana talked a little bit about the team membership. I mean, that's really important to have that multidisciplinary team, so you have aspects that are needed across all different areas throughout your tiered support, but also in your community, your school, and supporting those students in that way.
Yeah, excellent. Those are great details there around who's on the team and the whys, and thank you so much for that. Kiana, can you tell us a bit about the process that you're using to create behavior threat assessment and management programs in your district? And then if there's a little bit of time, maybe you can sneak in if you've been able to measure any implementation there.
Thank you. The model that we use currently has an 8-step action plan that goes through the 8 major steps to create your threat assessment program. And that includes establishing the team, defining the behaviors that would be considered a red flag or that would cue you to say we should screen for a threat assessment. You have to have training on your central reporting system or your anonymous reporting system for families, students, and staff, and be sure that that reporting system has availability for staff to be able to respond to things that come through there. You want to know when you're going to have law enforcement involved. Make sure that, like Denise said, you have to have your policies and procedures in place that are aligned with an effective threat assessment. You want to make sure that you have your whole intervention. So it's really important to have your supportive intervention system, and also to make sure that everybody who needs to be is well trained. So as we have been able to saturate our county with training for those multidisciplinary teams, we have also been able to begin to use implementation fidelity tool that is looking at the implementation of your threat assessment program. That tool is actually included as well on the website, but that has been interesting as people are becoming more serious about their safety and emergency operating plans to include those implementation checklists to make sure that they're hitting all the things they should to make sure their system is in place in a strong way.
Excellent. So all 3 of you really speak to the importance of including the entire school community, students, and sometimes caregivers as well, and really being able to ensure that you're aligning these approaches with other things that are going on, rather than being duplicative or laying on yet another thing that folks have to do. So I appreciate all of those approaches and thoughts. Denise, I'd like to come back to you for the next question. So in addition to the threat assessment, you spoke, you and your colleague really did inform me about the high levels of training and implementation that you've been doing, but also this multi-prong approach, including this idea of the whole school approach, using PBIS to create these supportive climates, the student wellness elements that you're doing. Can you take a few minutes just to describe some of these approaches that you're using and how you think they might help to prevent or mitigate incidents of violence?
Sure, thank you. So in our student wellness department, we have a very diverse makeup in regards to expertise and backgrounds. So we have mental health professionals, we have school staff in regards to teaching. I'm not school staff, teachers or school administrators. We have just a variety of school counselors, school psychology. So we really had that background. So it gives us the opportunity then to provide comprehensive expertise, tailored solutions, and effective delivery to meet specific needs and objectives to support the districts. We utilize a multi-tiered system of support, and we want to, which focuses on the whole child, which means that it's not only the academic growth that we're looking at, but we're also looking at other areas, including behavior, social, emotional needs, and absenteeism, suicide prevention we explore, violence prevention, all of those needs to support that whole child. And what, again, looking at not only needs in regards of maybe one solution, but how do we explore the wraparound approach to move them in the right direction. One of the tools that we created in our department is around the violence prevention tiered framework. So as far as under that MTSS umbrella, you have different areas of focus. So the violence prevention tiered framework really looks at strategies that you can utilize to support students and interventions. But then we also have other areas as far as the absenteeism, behavioral and social emotional needs, where we also have frameworks and we try to align our work to support the individual. And again, that aligning is so important because we want to be cohesive. We want to have a proactive approach to promote safety, addressing the potential threats for school violence, but also any other needs in regards to that might be impacting and having those risk factors.
Yeah, excellently. That's a great thing to hear about, paying attention to everything that a child might be presenting, knowing that the behavior that we're seeing is being driven by something, right? And being able to explore what those drivers are and perhaps meet those needs. Thank you so much. And just a reminder to the audience, if you don't have your chat open, please do open it. There's lots of resources coming through, including some that Steve, Kiana, and Denise have shared. Those resources will also be posted online on the webpage. Stephen, coming back to you. You mentioned when we spoke that the school matrix is customizable to specific activities and events. Can you describe how school personnel might create or customize a school matrix to something like a sports event, where there might be an increased risk of unwanted behaviors or even violent behaviors?
Absolutely. Such an important question and issue here. So what's interesting when we look at an extracurricular activity, right, or a sports event, or we know that scheduling outside school hours, locations, we know that attendance may not be directly related to the school community. It could be others visiting. It's large groups together in unstructured spaces. There's potential for increased access, prohibited items like weapons or alcoholic drugs. And there's a likelihood for behaviors that may be difficult to regulate, supervise, or monitor. So what we suggest is taking that idea of a matrix to help communicate what we're trying to accomplish through our culture of competent school climate. And what we do is we have the same ideas where we take expectations of what it is to be, and we connect these with our school as well. So our rules or expectations, if we are respectful, responsible, or safe, what's it look like as we arrive or depart the event? What's it look like for online social things? Because we do know that social media can be an issue for instigating issues for violence. We also know that when we look at things like the extracurricular events, to be safe, we want to know, who do you talk to if you see an issue, if you see a problem occurring. So it's important, again, as we create the culture, we identify what these behaviors are. We help to communicate across by sharing it with participants. We post it, we talk about it. And then we also, it's really important that it's not only the students, but all the, the security people there, the monitors, so that they understand. But the takeaway is, just posting is not likely to change behavior. It truly is how we talk about it, how we acknowledge what's going on, how we teach what these behaviors are, perhaps at assemblies before the event coming on.
Excellent. So you're setting up those expectations well before a student enters into them. Well, at least for some of them, social media, they may already be there, but you're still helping them to to engage in behaviors and set expectations that are agreed upon by the community, and not just for a specific student. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Kiana, I'd like to hear a bit more about, in our initial conversation, you mentioned that using the threat assessment is just the beginning. It's not the end all be all. It's not the beginning, middle, and end. Can you tell us, describe a little bit for us, the case management, the family engagement, community partnerships, those other elements that you mentioned to me in our conversation?
Mhm. As I mentioned, that community and that climate is a really most important part of this process. When we are asking questions and getting to know the student or the person who may have been screened or whose behaviors may have been considered for a threat assessment, we are really getting to know them. We're getting to know them as a person. We're trying to understand their family domain, so their individuality, their family, their peer dynamics, and getting to know what are their strengths. What do we know about this person? And what are some areas that perhaps they could use some extra support? And how can we get that support to that student and that family? And engaging in those relationships with the community agencies and the law enforcement, and having that climate in our school that's a climate of support and bringing students along and keeping them as part of our community is absolutely the most important part of this. A risk assessment is not a disciplinary thing. It is a way to it's a process to keep everybody safe and welcome and healthy. So we're able to hopefully support and meet the needs of the people in our community. And when we can do that, we're going to just encounter a safer school community.
I'd like to do one more question before we move into our content delivery ending and then move into our live Q&A. So just hearing briefly from each of you, as instances of school violence are happening in our schools and community, it's becoming all too common. How do you support school staff in embracing and leaning into this prevention work to address this important issue? Denise, I'd like to start with you on this question.
Cindy, it's really important to take a multifaceted approach that combines training, policy development, cultural shifts, mental health support, community engagement, and ongoing evaluation in order to support school personnel in embracing prevention work. Just to dig a little deeper in regards to training, providing training and education, it's important to look at the areas of need of your staff and your community, and tailoring those trainings to meet those needs. So this might be in the area of threat assessment, conflict resolution, crisis response, trauma-informed care, around gun violence prevention strategies. So it really depends on what is needed and how to continue to support your staff and your community around the training needs. Another strategy that I think is really important is around mental health support. Recognizing the impact of mental health on violence prevention, as well as the impact of trauma. It is important to prioritize those supports and then and have access to counseling, crisis intervention, peer support programs, and other initiatives that promote resilience, coping skills, and emotional well-being.
Excellent. You got lots of hands showing up there for when you started bringing up all those points. It is important because we know, especially when people have been exposed to some sort of a traumatic event, that this can be triggering. Adverse childhood experiences can be triggering. We don't know what's going on in folks' history. So being able to attend to their mental health as well as their behavioral health and academics is super helpful in this response. Steve, let's come over to you.
Yes, so I really think educators are doing the best they can given their skill sets and quality of the environment. So what we have been promoting through the center is to really focus on developing good systems to support educators. And if we have educators, you can have the best practices, but if you're not able to implement those, it will not get down to the students. So we need to develop effective systems. And basically, we see a couple things that affect the implementation of practice. One is educators, as you know, was just brought up by Denise, may not know what to do. So we want to make sure that they have the training, the professional development. Second thing is they may not want to do it because it's not aligned with their beliefs or their values. So we want to look for what are those commonalities to make sure that, you know, we look for that common ground. A third issue is there's a problem mismatch between policy and practice. And sometimes that policy practice involves barriers to implementation, like competing initiatives. So we need to make sure that those things are aligned. And finally, we want to make sure we have the proper materials there so that people can implement. They have the tools, the information ready to go forward. And that is improved by the use of teams, by looking at collecting that data and acting on that in a timely manner to support the systems development.
Excellent. And again, you also had some good responses coming up the side there for sure. And being able to have all those pieces together, and because there's nothing more frustrating than being asked to do something and being unable to do it for all those reasons you mentioned. So preparing all the educators and other school staff members to be able to be responsive is key. And Kiana, we're going to end with you.
All right. Well, Denise and Steve really nailed that one there. What I want to add is that being able to allow those in the system to have a voice and some agency in helping create those systems, giving them the opportunity to understand it while also maybe having an opportunity to build it alongside folks. And when they have that voice and they're acknowledged, even if it isn't exactly how that would align to their own personal beliefs or values that time, when their voice is able to be heard and be a part of it, they're much more likely to go along with and implement and try those practices. And I think that when we're given a voice and we're heard, we're much more likely to be able to implement that prevention stuff. And when our fears are acknowledged and supported, and you know that your team is there with you, you're much more likely to be able to use these prevention strategies.
Yes, I could hear your energy, and I saw your response when Steve brought that up. So I was wondering if you were going to go there. I definitely think, we talk about how important it is for educators and other school personnel to know the students. And we sometimes forget that it's as important for them to know each other, and having those values conversations can be helpful in that way. Thank you so very much. I'm going to pause our panel here for a moment because we know that some folks may need to log off, but we are hoping that everybody will stay. We've got questions in our Q&A queue, and our panel and other panelists and other speakers are happy to respond to them. What I'd like to do now, though, is let folks know about, just kind of review a few of the takeaways we're hoping you heard from this event. The first and foremost is that concept of positive school climate, that the prevention strategies, no matter what ones you're using, are going to be far more powerful and impactful when you already have the safe, supportive learning environment set up. It's an essential first step, is creating that positive, supportive school climate, using the matrices and having those clear expectations and routines. Some of the things that Steve and Kiana and Denise were talking about, as well as Greta, are important there. Utilizing threat assessments as a prevention tool as well as an intervention tool, but not as a means to an end. Right? It's not just about threat assessment. The threat assessment helps us to identify what kind of supports do we need to keep students safely in school, and to help them to manage the stuff that's going on in their lives so that they can engage in a positive way. Engaging students, parents, and other caregivers in safer gun storage practices. It's important to be able to get that information out to students and their caregivers in a way that's going to be supportive, is going to recognize different cultural values, and at the same time help us to increase the likelihood of using some of these storage practices that Janelle spoke about. And then the last piece that we're hoping folks heard is around the tip lines. Tip lines can be used as a way for community members, whether it's adults or students, to have a place to go when they have a concern. That they know they can call someplace or talk to someone to be able to initiate a process where a student can be provided supports and keep the entire student body safe. So those are our key takeaways, and we're hoping you heard those in the messages. And we'd like to do a preliminary thank you for all of our audience members. We hope, again, that you stick around for the last portion so we can get through some of the questions. But we also want to make sure that everyone's aware that this was just the first in our Preventing and Addressing Gun Violence in Schools mini-series. April 24th, you'll hear a webinar that is going to be focusing in on strategies to prepare emergency action plans, emergency operations plans, and other strategies to prep you as a school and as a district in the event that an incident should happen. Response, what can we do when an incident happens, and all the work that happens during the incident and in the time immediately following before the school reopens. And then recovery, the idea of reopening the school, re-engaging the students and families and the faculty and other school personnel, and all of the steps that we take in the recovery process. We'd also like to encourage each of you to take a few minutes to complete our feedback form. This feedback form link will go back into the chat feature after our Q&A, and we'll bring this back up after our speakers finish in the Q&A so that you can click that link. We do use the feedback to create content for you, so it's important for us to hear from you. And now I'd like to go back to our live Q&A pieces. And what I'd like to do here is we're going to go ahead and pull some questions from our audience. One of the questions, let's see. Okay, so a question here is actually on the last key takeaway that I spoke about. There's a question from an audience member asking about the anonymous reporting systems that were mentioned. How have you worked to build trust in those systems? The person says that the students don't feel like anything is done with the reporting, or trust the adult response, then these reporting system or anonymous reporter systems might not do their intended jobs. So Kiana and Denise and Steve, if you have anything to add here, or anyone else, how do you build trust there?
I think that what you have to do to build trust is to actually follow through on the tips that you receive. And some of them don't require a huge follow-up, but I believe that there does need to be a follow-up when they do occur. And I know that can be difficult and challenging, but each district or building needs to have a person who is chosen to be the responder to each one of those tips. And it has to be a consistent response. And if a person assigned to that is unable to do that, then you have to shift your system to have other people who are able to do that. This is an entire part of that, having a safe and supportive learning environment where it is predictable and we know what is going to happen. And if we have a tip, that it will be responded to.
Anybody else want to add to that, Steve?
Yes, excellent, Ken. I would add on to it that I think there's a lot of noise in systems, right? So if you look at people are posting things on Facebook on different areas. So I think part of it is also not only having one person respond or a dedicated, but a dedicated site to go to and say, this is the information and this is our accurate as we have, on this information. Please be careful, check your facts if you're looking at other sources. So it's just a way to add trust through that, I think.
So you would do the feedback pieces on a social media platform that is a monitored and managed by somebody at the school or in the district.
Or the school's website.
School's website.
A specific place, so it's not adding to where do you go for information,
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And that sort of both of your responses kind of feed into a follow-up to that, which was who monitors. It doesn't matter the who necessarily, I guess, but just as long as a person has that as a role and understands the process and all the things that are available in the schools for support. And Denise, I saw you come off mute just then. Did you want to add?
I think it also could, we talked a little bit about having a safe and supportive environment, having that climate. And I think that's really important as well, is if you have that established where people feel safe and comfortable in regards to coming forward in an anonymous way, that I think that'll be helpful as well.
Yeah, and ideally, if there's a safe and supportive climate and people feel as though folks are less likely to be calling them out for doing something wrong, but they're there to be supportive, they might be more likely to lean into that tip line as well, for sure. Here's a question. It's again, that's open to whomever would like to respond. What are some additional strategies you might have for engaging parents or caregivers in this prevention work? Has anybody delved into that? I know you have little bits and pieces that you've done. Anybody want to tackle adding some suggestions there?
Yes. Yes. So what I would suggest is a lot of times we will hold a meeting and say this is a parent meeting and we hope people show up. And sometimes it's the same people. So what we have found is it's really important to reach out to those who may not be coming to school, to get their voice, to get their input, because there could be a distrust or a misunderstanding. So we would go to the events in the community where different populations would attend or participate. We would reach out to parents and say, could you help share this information? So it's not coming directly from me as a school person, but it's parent to parent to help develop the trust.
Excellent. I think it's so important to engage the parent and parent voice. That also helps to ensure that anything that's done in the school is more representative of the community itself, right? And the different values and cultural beliefs that folks might have. Okay, anybody else want to add to that? All right. Now here's a bit of a challenging question. I'm not sure if there's any easy answers to this, but I'm going to ask it. What can a school do if there's sort of an uneven distribution of young people in a district where one school might have a disproportionate number of individuals who might need the higher tiers, tier 2 or tier 3 services? Does anybody have an idea of approaches that you might take or that you've heard of in schools where you have that kind of high level need?
I can start out.
Sure.
So I think a couple things to keep in mind is that the issues are contextual. So we want to make sure that we understand what the culture is, what the environment that people are within. So there's no easy answers without getting into that. But the general rules that I might suggest is one, tier 1 supports everyone. So if you have a really good tier 1, it's going to help those kids who are struggling. It's
Right.
going to help everyone, but for those.
Mhm.
In addition to developing that tier 1, we also need to make sure that we have effective teaming to support those who need more intensive supports. And on that, we want to make sure that we've got the best expertise that we have within that district or at school. And also, because of that, we too often may dismiss the student voice involved in this or the community. So we want to make sure we connect to, it's almost like an all hands on deck, right? So what are those community organizations? What are the mental health that may be connected? What are the girls club, boys club, all those types of things that can help support.
Yeah, all that community wraparound, which is going to give or can give 24/7, if you will, 365 kind of supports. But it's also that idea of really letting students know, young people know you're not alone. You have relationships within this community, and pulling folks in. We're coming toward the end, so I'd like to ask, it's going to be a speed round, 30 seconds, no more than a minute, but it's between 30 and 45 seconds. As you work in this important prevention work, what gives you hope for mitigating violence in our schools? And whoever comes off mute first, Kiana. Oh,
I thought Denise beat me, but I'll go.
sorry.
I have hope that violence can be prevented. I know that it can, and I believe that, and I know that our relationship, a strong, healthy relationship is all it takes for a young person to be able to succeed and to fight through any challenges they have, and systems in place to support kids. The hope I have is I know it can work, and I believe it, and all we have to do is care and support for each other.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Denise, sorry about that, Denise. I didn't see your.
No, that's all right. No problem. It was a race. I just want to add to Kiana. I think for me, it's partnerships I see hope in is that we all, we're working together as a team to try to, prevent violence, create, a safe environment, and really, look at what strengths each one of us can bring as a partnership and how to support individuals in systems in regards to putting in strategies that are effective.
Excellent. So those partnerships, again, it's a different kind of relationship like Karen was mentioning. Steve, did you want to jump in?
Absolutely. So I just have such admiration for our educators out there. It's not an easy job, but they are committed to do what's best for kids. So I think that is very hopeful. I also think what's very hopeful is that we have a science of evidence-based practices. We know some things that can work. We know how to create systems. So I think our work is cut out for us of how to get those in place and support people to do the best they can.
Absolutely. And the hope is that we all came together today, right? We came together today to talk about this important issue. Our audience is here listening and taking down notes and probably clicking on links in chat. All of this is hopeful work for us to continue to reduce violence. We know we're not going to totally ditch every act of violence, but if we can reduce it, if we can help students to feel safe, if we can keep our communities supportive and healthy, then that's going to push us forward in being able to accomplish our goals. So we do appreciate everybody for being here today. I appreciate all of the icons that are showing up on the screen for us. And if we didn't get to your questions will be passed on to our speakers and also to the Department of Ed. And we hope that you take a few minutes to complete that feedback form for us. And the link is going back into the chat now. And otherwise, we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much and enjoy.